Through the sterile ventilation grates of the Academy Medical Wing drifted the unmistakable, unauthorized scent of roasted terrestrial beans. It was approaching 0800 hours when the blast doors sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss. 300 cadets filled the lecture hall observation decks above. Echoed across the silent room, a dull ceramic clink. That specific sound, Zale would later record in his civilian pathology logs. The human, Ren Calloway, had just set a cardboard-sleeved cup onto a sterilized examination tray. She did not belong in Triage Nexus 4. Beside her, Commander Vance lay submerged in a stasis pod, his subdermal ichor darkening from a lethal perium exposure. The human casually scratched a small, pink fibrous line on her thumb. Zale noted her flushed skin. He calculated her rising surface temperature and documented the inevitable onset of terminal fever. I'll be honest with you, the perium was a tragedy, but what we found inside that human's veins, that was a revelation that still haunts my sleep. Faded the steady beep of Vance's cardiac monitors, replaced instantly by the blaring lockdown siren. Cale, the Academy's chief medical officer, surged into the room. His gelatinous dermal layers rippled violently under the harsh fluorescent lighting. A heavy, resonant hum vibrated from his throat membrane. "Evacuate the non-essential biologicals," Cale commanded, his analytical dataspeak clipped and breathless. "The perium strain is airborne. Incubation is instantaneous." Across the observation glass above, the terrified faces of Cadet Brunt and his classmates pressed against the transparent aluminum, witnessing the collapse of their civilization's greatest medical minds. A weapon fought with scalpels, this was not. Perium operated by dissolving cellular adhesion entirely, a biological erasure. From his restricted civilian terminal, Zale watched the telemetry data plummet. Deeply disturbing to him was the ambient heat radiating from the human, an evolutionary wrongness that made his own cooling fluids thicken. Vance's breathing apparatus began to degrade. Clattering onto the steel floor fell a small, hand-carved bone bead, tied to the ventilation tube by his youngest offspring. Total system failure. Inevitable. This absolute medical surrender, Envoy Sarah refused to accept. She had arrived moments before the quarantine, demanding access to Vance's pathology files. Perium, she revealed, was a naturally occurring Apexian biological defense, not an engineered strike. Cale denied her request immediately. "Quarantine protocols supersede diplomatic clearance," Cale stated. He locked down the central bypass scanner. Beneath the observation decks, the remaining uninfected delegates began exhibiting the same rapid subdermal darkening. Zale knew the automated synthesizers could isolate compounds, but Cale had severed the network connection. A bead of condensation, the human wiped off her visor. "Is the environmental control broken?" Ren asked, her tone entirely conversational. "My drink is getting lukewarm." She shifted her weight, sighing with an auditory exhalation that rattled the silent room. Through the passive scanners, Zale tracked her internal metrics. At a staggering 98.6 degrees held her core temperature. That she was still standing defied all Drolkani medical literature. The perium should have liquefied her respiratory tract 40 minutes ago. Instead, she just reached for her cardboard-sleeved cup again. By 0812 hours, the primary environmental scrubbers failed. Behind the sealed blast doors, the recycled oxygen tasted sharply of copper and scorched circuitry. Zale could not stand by and watch Commander Vance degrade into a necrotic husk. He stepped toward the human, producing a manual hematology bypass extractor from his civilian pathology kit. If he could isolate the terminal fever stages of her infected blood, perhaps he could synthesize a temporary palliative inhibitor. He signaled Cadet Brunt, 19 cycles old with trembling palps, who pressed his bare hand against the heavy observation glass from the lecture hall above. The Academy's medical chief, Cale, hammered his fists against the locked command console, demanding Zale step away from the contaminated biological. Ignoring the furious superior, Zale primed the extractor's pneumatic needle. Beside the dying commander, the human sighed loudly. Ren shifted the cardboard heat sleeve down her cup, finding the upper rim slightly too warm against her bare palm. Into her median cubital vein, Zale plunged the extractor, flashed the crimson bypass screen into a blinding, pure white. Zale stared at the raw telemetry scrolling across the holographic interface. The human was not dying. Her 98.6-degree core temperature was a baseline operating environment. That pink fibrous line on her thumb was not a symptom of decay. It was an aggressive, hyper-accelerated cellular regeneration happening in real time. The cure for a dying conclave was hidden in the veins of a single survivor. 500 million, Zale whispered, his voice trembling across the open comms to the breathless lecture hall. She maintains 500 million circulating B cells at all times. The sheer caloric violence, Zale calculated internally, terrified his logic centers. To sustain a daily output of 10 billion white blood cells required an evolutionary history steeped in constant microscopic warfare. Total biological dominance. This was not an immune system. This was an active, standing biological military. Ren took a sip of her dark liquid. I mean, yeah. My bone marrow makes roughly 200 billion red ones a day too. Is the climate control coming back on? Bypassing Kale's locked network protocol, Cadet Brunt slammed his palm onto the manual synthesis override. He routed the human's raw plasma profile directly into the Valerian delegate's intravenous feed. The Pyrium necrosis halted instantly, devoured whole by the mammalian antigens. The fundamental laws of Drolkani medical science shattered in an instant. Everything they understood about biological vulnerability was rendered entirely obsolete by a single terrifying species. Ren set her coffee cup on the steel examination tray with a dull ceramic clink, echoing against the silence of 300 watching cadets. A low, resonant membrane hum filled the medical wing. Above the examination table, the Valerian delegate's subdermal ichor flushed bright blue once more. Ren lifted her drink, her thumb resting against the smooth cardboard. The small scratch there had sealed entirely into fresh, unbroken skin. On the tray remained a single ring of dried, brown liquid.